Go ahead, counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor. Just to wrap things up. A couple of more questions. When you talk about familiarity between the person accused of improperly touching a child and the child, are you referring to typically an ongoing relationship between the two?
I think that's what I characterized when I said acquaintance, yes.
And by acquaintance, you mean a relationship where it appears that the two parties are actively involved with one another at some level.
Well, without getting all that complicated about it.
Sure.
It's when the perpetrator and the victim know each other, and, the opposite would be a stranger. And so that's really what I'm trying to characterize as, most of the time the perpetrator and the victim know each other. And I don't know if that's simpler or any more clear or less clear, but that's what I was trying to characterize. That's what the research shows with regard to sexual abuse.
If you uncover evidence that the person accused is trying to disassociate him or herself from the alleged victim, that would not be consistent with what you're talking about, right?
Well, again, I'll get stuck on your word, alleged. The child sex abuse accommodation syndrome talks about what commonly occurs between a victim in the act of being sexually abused, and so it makes as its presumption that the child has been sexually abused. So the word alleged is difficult in that situation.
Well, if, hypothetically speaking, you have a situation where you learn that someone has been very generous to a family in need, took that family into his home, was told the child was dying, gave them all kinds of benefits to help them with this very difficult situation, was told the family was impoverished, and at some point there's evidence that the person now decides, they're taking advantage of me. I really want to disassociate myself from them. They're causing all kinds of problems. They're referring to me as the daddy to everybody when I can't be their daddy, and you see evidence in the hypothetical that person is trying to sort of gradually get away from them. It's unlikely a molestation is going to occur at that point, isn't it?
It's not my place to make a determination about whether a molestation occurred or not.
Okay, thank you.
Doctor, the example that Mr. Mesereau just gave you of a person attempting to disassociate with a victim, if the same person was, in fact, plying that child with alcohol and pornography, is that consistent with grooming that child for purposes of molestation?
The prospect of giving alcohol, exposing children or the victim to pornographic material, is completely consistent with the notion of grooming. That phrase, grooming, has specific meaning in the field, but it's consistent with the notion of grooming.
Object to the question. Move to strike. Violates the court's order.
I believe that it was opened up by the preceding question by counsel, behavior of the suspect.
The court has ordered not to use the word pornography, and Mr. Zonen knows that.
If I did use that word, I don't recall. I'm sorry.
I haven't forbidden anyone to use the word pornography. The use of the word pornography, as applying to the materials being introduced, is forbidden, because that's going to be a jury question for how they characterize that evidence. But as long as you're not, as you're using pornography, that it doesn't relate to the evidence in this case, you can use that. It was used earlier in the hearing. But since you have a hard time distinguishing that, maybe you should use adult material all the time.
I will. Is that the extent of the objection?
It is.
Then I'm prepared to proceed.
All right.
Doctor, a person who makes available to a child, virtually 24 hours a day, every form of entertainment, from video games to all manner of other games, to no restrictions whatsoever, is that something that could be considered grooming for purposes of making a child susceptible to sexual abuse?
Certainly. I mean, grooming is, and I made reference earlier to this pattern of increasing sexuality in the relationship. It desensitizes the child. Grooming, I think, is a broader scope issue, because grooming really involves the prospect where a perpetrator provides a lot of desirable things to a child, and those can be the special attention, making best buddies, sharing a lot of things. It can also be sharing a lot of material things, the coolest Nintendo games, the most interesting bikes or nicest car, whatever. It can be a lot of things that essentially pair the perpetrator with good, fun, enjoyable times. And once that is established, then is when the sexuality starts to become a part of that relationship. And again, as I say, that's part of the grooming. The increased sexuality makes it more accessible for the child to respond positively or favorably to the sexual approaches of the perpetrator. Now, the statement that you made is within the realm of grooming behavior.
How about encouraging a child to share not just a bedroom with the suspect, but sharing a bed with the person as well? Would that be considered grooming?
Certainly. That would be
beyond the scope, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Doctor, in circumstances where children have difficulty relating, or relaying with some degree of accuracy events, tell us, what is the difficulty associated with children talking about when things occur, or how frequently things occur?
Well, when things occur, is kids don't run their lives with watches and calendars like adults do. So they may make mistakes about whether it happened the day before, the day after, the 13th or the 14th. I mean, those types of things. They make mistakes like this fairly commonly, not just within the context of the sexual abuse. But kids do that, so there's the when. And I forget what the other part of your question was.
When or how frequently?
The how frequently is, if something happens just once, usually this issue of frequency is not hard to determine. If it happens twice or 3 times, it's not hard to determine. If it happens more than that, then it's easy to not be clear about whether something happened on the first time, well, actually the 4th time or the 6th time. Because those things, the specific events related to each of those incidents may run together. With regard to sexual abuse, if oral copulation occurred on the 4th time and the 6th, but not the 5th time, that would be the mistake. The child would say, well, maybe it happened on the 4th and 5th time. They may not be completely accurate in being able to be reliable in describing those types of details.
Doctor, are you familiar at all with any studies that have been written that deal with the issue of false allegations of child sexual abuse for purposes of financial gain?
Objection. Asked and answered.
Not by me.
Overruled. You may answer.
I'm not familiar with any studies related to that.
None that you've read or none that you haven't read. In other words, studies that you're aware of their existence but haven't read.
I try to keep fairly current with the literature on all aspects of, most aspects of sexual abuse. And particularly with issues of false allegations. And there are, in fact, several studies about false allegations, but I'm not familiar with any study, either that I've read or just generally aware of, where the purpose of the false allegation was financial gain.
Can I assume that over the past 20-plus years that you've been dealing with this subject, child sexual abuse, have there been any cases that you have had personal contact with where there were allegations of sexual impropriety for purposes of financial gain?
I've never encountered a case like that.
Doctor, of all the cases that you have dealt with on a personal level, not research, but on a personal level, have you had a number of cases where you were later able to determine were false allegations?
If the number is 2, yes. I've had 2 cases where there was a determination that the allegation was false.
That's over 20 years with more than 1,000 cases.
Well, I started doing therapy with kids in 1983, so since that time. I've had 2 cases in which there was a determination that the allegation that the child made was false.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Counsel.
In the cases where the false allegations were made, were you the one determining that the child made a false allegation of sexual abuse?
In one of them, I wasn't making the determination. It was an incident where a child made an allegation that he was sexually abused by his father in a fast food restaurant. I don't remember what kind of fast food restaurant. And the father it was a custody dispute between the mother and the father. And the father had videotaped the entire duration of the visit, and the mother was there through most of it. And he videotaped driving in, the beginning to the end. So it captured the whole interaction of him and his child in the visit. And I watched that videotape. And the child said he was molested, and I never saw anything related to that. So that was one. The other one I didn't make that determination. It was a child who was on a locked psychiatric unit, made an allegation of abuse of a staff person on a particular day. And that staff person was not working on that day and wasn't physically there. So it was impossible for him to have been sexually abused by that staff person.
Now, you're not telling the jury that a parent cannot manipulate children to make false statements for financial gain, are you?
No, that was related to the questions that you asked me earlier. I mean, I can't make that statement.
In any of your work as a clinical psychologist, have you ever done any investigation or study of situations where parents have schooled children to steal or lie?
Have schooled children to steal or lie?
Yes.
So they coached them, trained them to steal or lie?
Yes.
Not that I'm aware.
It's not your field, is it?
I'm not aware of any research studies. I have not done any research studying on stealing and lying, at least directly. And I'm not aware of any cases in which a parent had coached their child to steal or lie.
You can go back to the novel Oliver Twist to see examples of situations where an adult.
I'll object as exceeding the scope of the redirect.
That sounds like an argumentative question to me.
I'll object in that way as well.
Okay. In any of these cases of false allegations of child sexual abuse, was the target a world-famous celebrity perceived as being very wealthy?
I've never been involved in a case like that, nor read research related to that.
Thank you.
No further questions.
All right. Thank you. Counsel, you may step down.
Thank you.
Call your next witness.
Lauren Wallace.
While that witness is coming in, let me remind you that tomorrow afternoon we won't be in session from 11:30. We'll release you at 11:30. And Monday morning, we're going to have you come in later than normal because we're going to have some oral argument on some issues. I'll wait till later in the week to tell you exactly what time, because I need to talk to the attorneys about how long the argument's going to take. But you won't be coming in at 8:30. It will be 10:30 or 11:30. And then Thursday, the 31st, which is a week from this coming Thursday, is a court holiday, so we won't be in session on that court holiday. All right, is the witness here now?
Yes.
Come forward. When you get to the witness stand, please remain standing. Face the clerk and raise your right hand.
I swear.
Please be seated. State and spell your name for the record.
My name is Lauren Wallace, Lauren Wallace.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Miss Wallace.
Hi.
Who is your employer, please?
I'm currently self-employed at this time.
She's got to speak up.
One thing we're going to have you do is speak into that microphone. We've had a little problem with people hearing.
Okay.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
You're currently self-employed.
Yes.
At some time in the past, did you work for a company called Xtra Jet?
Yes.
What did you do for Xtra Jet?
I was the lead flight attendant for Xtra Jet.
And when did your employment cease for Xtra Jet?
July 3, 2004.
She still needs to scoot up.
Okay. They're still asking us to have you get closer to the microphone.
Is your microphone on?
Mine is on. What is Xtra Jet?
Xtra Jet is a charter airline company.
And who does Xtra Jet seek as clientele for their services?
Basically anyone who would like their services rendered. They specify particularly towards celebrities and sports figures.
How many planes does Xtra Jet fly, or did Xtra Jet fly during the period, say, 2003, 2004, when you worked for them?
They had approximately 4 different aircraft, 2 of which were Gulfstreams.
You said you quit working for Xtra Jet in June of 2004. How long did you work for Xtra Jet?
I worked for them approximately 2.5 years.
And you said you were chief cabin hostess, is that correct?
Yes, chief lead flight attendant.
Could you describe to me what your duties were as a chief flight attendant for Xtra Jet?
My duties entailed ensuring that all the aircraft were up to specifications in regards to emergency equipment, safety equipment, all the dishes and linens and china and crystal and everything on board in preparation for a first-class flight, as well as finding and staffing the right flight attendants for each aircraft.
So you'd supervise other flight attendants?
Yes.
And how many other flight attendants did you supervise? Again, we'll go to the time frame, 2003, 2004.
2 other flight attendants other than myself.
Okay. And what were their names?
One's name was Cindy, and the other girl's name was Jamie.
Jamie.
Yes.
Okay. And Cindy's last name, was that Bell? Cindy Bell.
Yes.
Okay. Have you had any background or training as a flight attendant before the time you went to work for Xtra Jet?
Yes, I did.
And can you tell us a little bit about that?
Training entailed a 5-day training course in corporate aviation. I also had FAA Part 121 training with a different company. And approximately 6 months of experience prior to coming to Xtra Jet.
As far as supervising the other flight attendants, what would that involve?
I basically ensured that their service was better than average, that they had better than a first-class service, and that they knew what to do in case there was an emergency.
Can you tell me who your immediate boss or supervisor was in that same time period? And I'm going to stick with the 2003-2004 time period.
Yes, Jim Duggan.
And you mentioned the number of jets. What are the different capacities of these jets that Xtra Jet owns?
They carried approximately 12 people.
What kind of configurations in terms of the layout of the floor plan in the jet?
They had club seating in them. Sometimes they had seating at tables. Normally there will be 2 seats immediately upon walking in. One to the left, one to the right. Another one facing those seats. Then maybe a table of 4. And then maybe a sofa for 3. And then 2 more seats facing each other, approximately.
Are any of these jets capable of coast-to-coast flight, from, say, California to Miami?
Yes.
All of them or just a few of them?
Gulfstreams, yes. The other Lear jets I really don't know.
Can you give me a brief synopsis of the day in the life of a flight attendant for a private charter jet such as a Gulfstream on a coast-to-coast flight?
First of all, you need to be there 2 hours ahead of time. And then you need to arrive with all of your catering, the food and everything that the clients requested. In addition to that, all the food for the pilots as well. You need to make sure the aircraft is clean and that everything is functional in the aircraft. The entertainment system, the drains, the toilet, everything. And then you wait for the passengers, or you prepare for the passengers, whatever you think they might want. Coffee, soda pop. And then you wait for the passengers and you greet the passengers. You take off.
And then how long does the flight take from, again, we'll use California to Miami as an example?
5 to 5.5 hours.
And over that 5 to 5.5 hours, what are your duties?
My duties are, first, to ensure that the passengers are all safe, and should we need to emergency evacuate, that we're able to do that. Secondly, it is to cater to the passengers and that they get their food and their beverages, and that they're comfortable and happy.
You mentioned that Xtra Jet, among the clients that Xtra Jet works with are celebrities.
Yes.
Have you personally worked on flights provided by Xtra Jet to Michael Jackson?
Yes, I have.
And is the individual Michael Jackson in court today?
Yes.
Could you identify him for the record, please? Just identify him by pointing, if you would, please.
Okay, Mr. Jackson.
If the record could reflect the defendant was identified.
All right.
How many total flights have you flown with Mr. Jackson on them in which you were the flight attendant?
Between 15 and 25.
And were you also the preparation hostess on those flights, the person who prepared the plane for Mr. Jackson?
Yes.
Can you tell me, when was the last time that you flew on a flight with him, or worked on a flight with Mr. Jackson?
I believe that last flight was November, around the end of November. November, I think, 22nd, 2003.
All right. And can you characterize for us your relationship with Mr. Jackson based on those 11 odd flights?
It was professional, but on a very friendly basis.
During a 5-hour flight, would you serve cocktails if that was requested?
Certainly.
Okay. And soft drinks?
Yes.
What about meals?
Yes.
Snacks, this type of thing?
Yes.
What other services would you provide, other than food and beverage?
I would ensure that the passengers were warm. I would ensure that the passengers knew if there was going to be turbulence, or if we had to wait to take off. I would give them their jackets, take their shoes away if they requested.
Did you ever work any flights with a family that you, by the name of Arvizo?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay. Are you aware of other flight attendants at Xtra Jet who did work flights involving Mr. Jackson?
Yes.
Okay. Who would that be?
I know of the two from Xtra Jet, Cindy Bell and Jamie Crow, both.
Both worked with Mr. Jackson.
That were employees of Xtra Jet.
So other than food and beverage and helping out with the requests of the passengers, would that pretty much comprise your duties, and making sure the safety of the passengers is paramount? Would that pretty much take care of your duties as a flight attendant?
That and cleaning, yes.
Okay. How busy would you be during a 5 to 5.5 hour flight coast to coast, typically?
Depending on the number of passengers, I would not be busy at all, or I would be very busy throughout the entire flight.
And assume that you have a full passenger list on one of the Gulfstreams. How busy would you be during that 5-hour flight? I guess my question would be, would you get any downtime during that 5.5 hour flight with a full passenger list on a Gulfstream?
It would be safe to say that I would have minimal downtime.
Regarding Mr. the preparation of Mr. Jackson's plane, would he have any special requests?
He had special catering orders.
Okay.
That is standard with every flight.
And describe what that would be for me, if you could.
His precise orders are.
Yes.
Or an example of.
How would he like the plane prepared before takeoff?
Well, as far as having the plane itself prepared.
No, I mean special requests. Any things, items that he wanted on the plane. Beverages, food, this type of thing.
His normal catering request was, and it may not have been his. It may have been one of his children's or nannies or something. But my trip sheet always had like Kentucky Fried Chicken, and Subway sandwiches some of the time, and sometimes chicken breast with rice pilaf.
Okay. Would Mr. Jackson have any special requests regarding alcohol?
It was never written on a trip sheet.
Okay. But did you become aware of a special request that he desired when he flew on Xtra Jet regarding alcohol?
Yes.
How did you become aware of that?
Through another flight attendant.
And who was that?
Miss Bell.
And during the flights that you flew with Mr. Jackson, how did you handle? Well, let me back up, first of all, and ask you a foundational question. Did Mr. Jackson drink alcohol on those flights that you flew with him, the 11 flights?
Yes.
All of them?
Not all of them, no.
Okay. Can you characterize how many of them he drank alcohol on?
9 or 10.
Can you characterize the amount of consumption of alcohol that he would drink on a given flight?
Objection. Vague.
How about, I can tighten that up. Can you characterize how much alcohol he would drink on a typical coast-to-coast flight?
It was different from what I witnessed.
From what to what?
Sometimes maybe it was a little bit of wine. And other times it was maybe 3-6 ounces of wine, and then a glass or two of tequila or Tanqueray gin. But it wasn't like I looked and said, that's exactly 7 ounces, or anything.
Okay. I'm just asking for your general recollections. You said a glass or two of Tanqueray or tequila. Would he drink out of a glass?
Yes, he would.
Would he ever drink wine out of anything other than a glass?
Yes.
What would he drink out of?
A Diet Coke can.
Did you prepare those cans for him?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Tell me about that. How did that come about that you would put wine in a Diet Coke can?
Miss Bell had informed me that that is something that he did. And so when I initially flew Mr. Jackson, I had emptied out 3 Diet Coke cans and filled them up halfway with white wine, kept them on ice for him, and had them available for him upon boarding.
Did you serve him wine in a Diet Coke can?
Yes. I placed them there for him.
Did he drink it?
Yes. Maybe not all of it sometimes.
Would he ever have a mixed drink in a Diet Coke can, such as tequila or Tanqueray?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
And when you prepared a flight for Mr. Jackson, how often would you prepare these cans with wine in them? You said you did about 3.
I would make 3 up, approximately 3. And if there was more people in the party, I would make up more than that.
Would other people drink wine out of the Coke cans?
Sometimes, yes.
Do you have any specific recollections of someone else drinking wine out of a Coke can other than Mr. Jackson?
I believe, I don't know his name, but I think he was his cousin or something. I think he was a family member.
A what?
I believe he was a family member of Mr. Jackson's.
You don't recall his name.
No.
Do you recall what he looked like, this individual?
He was an attractive younger gentleman. Brown, wavy hair, very full. Dark olive complexion.
Do you know, can you approximate his age?
22.
When was this flight? Do you remember?
It must have been around October of 2003.
Miss Wallace, did you ever hide alcohol on any of these flights for Mr. Jackson?
Yes, I did.
What did you hide? What alcohol did you hide for Mr. Jackson?
I hid little bottles of Tanqueray and tequila, and maybe vodka.
And what are we talking about, the small airplane-type bottles?
Yes.
Is that?
Those are called minis.
Minis. Okay. And where would you hide those bottles?
It depended. Usually in the lav above children's reach. The lav is the lavatory and the bathroom of the airplane.
And how would Mr. Jackson become aware of the location of the bottles?
I would inform him. Initially I informed him. But after a while, upon flying the same aircraft, I figured that maybe he would know they were there for his disposal.
You said, usually in the lav. Where else would you hide bottles?
I know once I carried one in my jacket pocket, but he never got it.
Okay.
He never knew it was there. It wasn't for him to really get. I was just going to give it to him, but I never got the opportunity.
And did he ever drink those bottles? Did you ever find evidence that he had ever drunk any of those bottles?
Once or twice. Only 1 or 2 bottles. It was very rare.
How many occasions? How many of the flights that you flew on with him did you hide these bottles?
Out of the, let's see, 20 flights we did. They were there maybe 15 of the flights.
Alright, 15 times.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Mr. Mesereau.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You were interviewed by the Santa Barbara sheriffs about this case, right?
Yes, I was.
Do you know how many times you were interviewed by them?
Once.
Okay, and your understanding was that Mr. Jackson did not want children seeing him drink alcohol, right?
Yes.
And it was your understanding that he wanted wine placed in cans because he didn't want children to see him drinking that wine, right?
I'll object. Foundation. Hearsay.
Foundation. Sustained.
Did you have an understanding as to why Michael Jackson wanted white wine placed in cans on the flights?
Same objection.
Overruled. You can answer that, yes, or no.
Yes.
Would you please tell the jury what your understanding was as to why you were putting white wine in cans on the flights?
Same objection.
Sustained. Foundation.
Did someone ever tell you that Mr. Jackson wanted wine placed in soda cans because he didn't want children to see it?
Objection. Same objection.
Sustained.
Why did you hide those little bottles of alcohol so children couldn't get to them?
I wanted to make sure that Mr. Jackson and whomever he decided to inform that there was additional alcohol for grown-ups to drink, that they could at their own disposal in secrecy.
And why did you put white wine in soda cans when Mr. Jackson flew on the flights?
Same objection as before, Your Honor.
No, it's not. She's already testified that the other flight attendant told her to under-direct, so I'll allow the question. I don't think it's the same question. I'm going to have it reread so you know what the question is. Go ahead, reread it. Record read.
I'll object as foundation.
Okay. I'll go ahead and lay the foundation.
You testified in response to the government prosecutor's questions that you had talked to Cindy Bell, right?
Yes.
And Cindy Bell also worked with you with Xtra Jet, right?
Yes.
And Cindy Bell would often work with you on plane flights where Mr. Jackson was a passenger, right?
We never worked together, but she was on one flight with him and I was on the other, so.
And you discussed with Cindy Bell why Mr. Jackson wanted wine placed in cans, correct?
Yes.
And you did indicate in response to the prosecutor's questions that because of what Ms. Bell said to you, you would put wine in cans, right?
Yes.
And Ms. Bell told you in that regard, he didn't want children to see him drinking, right?
Objection. Hearsay.
Sustained. Hearsay.
What did Ms. Bell tell you in that regard?
Same objection.
Sustained.
Do you remember telling the Santa Barbara sheriffs in your interview that Mr. Jackson didn't want children to see him drinking at all?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Do you know of your own personal knowledge why Mr. Jackson wanted wine placed in cans on these flights?
Yes, I do.
And what do you know?
Your Honor, objection.
Calls for hearsay. Sustained.
Okay. Do you remember telling the Santa Barbara sheriffs that you had never observed children intoxicated on flights when Mr. Jackson was a passenger?
Objection, beyond the scope.
Overruled. You may answer. Do you know the question?
I never saw intoxicated children on Mr. Jackson's flights.
Okay. And was it your understanding that Mr. Jackson wanted wine placed in cans because he tends to get nervous on flights?
Yes.
And, Ms. Wallace, are you familiar with what is called a passenger profile for people who fly on Xtra Jet flights?
I am aware of this, yes.
Would you please tell the jury what a passenger profile is?
A passenger profile is a profile based on each passenger with their likes and dislikes, their friends' dislikes, likes and dislikes, and families' likes and dislikes. And their notes basically so that if another flight attendant or another person should work with that particular client, that they're aware of allergies or preferences.
And Mr. Jackson had given the Xtra Jet company some information to put in his passenger profile, right?
He did not give Xtra Jet any information. It's information that was gathered.
Well, didn't Mr. Jackson's passenger profile say that white wine in Diet Coke cans is to be prepared for every flight?
His profile could have said that.
Would it refresh your recollection if I just show it to you?
Yes, it would.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Miss Wallace, have you had a chance to review that passenger profile on Michael Jackson that was prepared by Xtra Jet?
Yes.
Does it refresh your recollection about whether or not in Mr. Jackson's passenger profile it was specified that white wine in Diet Coke cans are to be ready for every flight?
Yes.
Okay. Had you actually been shown that at some point?
I wrote it.
Oh, you wrote it. Okay. Alright. So you're the one that wrote down Kentucky Fried Chicken for all these meals, right?
Everybody has different likes.
Okay. You had Kentucky Fried Chicken for breakfast, lunch and dinner, right?
Yeah, it's good.
Now, did you do the passenger profiles for Mr. Jackson's children as well?
Yes, I did.
And you wrote down, Paris loves to bake cookies and will try to eat the sugar. Is that what you wrote?
Yes, I did.
Did you know his children very well?
I know them, but I don't think I know them very well.
Did you often see them on flights with him?
Yes, I would.
Okay. In fact, most of the flights he took with Xtra Jet, they would be with him, right?
Certainly, yes.
Okay. Now, Mr. Auchincloss, the prosecutor, asked you about miniature bottles of alcohol that you would have on the plane for Mr. Jackson, right?
Yes.
And do you know why Mr. Jackson wanted to have those miniature bottles on the plane?
Mr. Jackson never asked for the miniature bottles to be on the aircraft.
Okay. Well, you brought those miniature bottles on the aircraft for a reason, didn't you?
I brought them to better my service rendered to Mr. Jackson.
Do you remember testifying before the Santa Barbara grand jury about this?
Yes.
And do you remember telling the Santa Barbara grand jury, I knew that Mr. Jackson did not like to drink alcohol in front of his children, so I would bring in a little miniature baggie full of little miniature bottles of Tanqueray gin and tequila. Do you remember saying that?
Yes.
And you said, I would put them away, hide them away in the lavatory, and I would sometimes inform him that they were there for his own disposal. Do you remember saying that?
Yes.
Okay. When did you first meet Mr. Jackson?
I believe I initially met him. It must have been around October of. Maybe it was more like March of 2003.
And when did you last see him?
Around the end of November of 2003.
And did you ever meet a physician of Mr. Jackson on any of those flights?
No, not that I know of, no.
You don't recall that. Okay. Do you recall seeing other people with Mr. Jackson typically on these flights?
Yes.
Nannies, for example.
Yes.
Okay. When you saw his children, would you usually see nannies with them on these flights?
Yes.
And other members of his family would fly with him from time to time, right?
Yes.
And approximately how many seats did an Xtra Jet plane have for one of these types of flights, if you know?
Usually, 12 or 13. One plane at that time carried 13.
And when Mr. Jackson would fly on these flights, would all the seats typically be full, if you remember?
6 out of 10 times the seats would be full. Sometimes there would be 1 or 2, the empty seats.
Did he often have security people with him?
Yes, he did.
Did you ever see Mr. Jackson dozing off on any of these flights?
Sleeping, yes, I would.
Okay. Did he often do that?
Half the time, yes.
Okay.
Maybe 7 out of 10 times.
Now, you have to get on a plane tomorrow morning, don't you?
Yes, I do. It's private. It's a personal trip, so it's not a work trip.
Well, no further questions, then. Thank you.
Anything further?
Just a couple of questions, Your Honor. How often would Mr. Jackson fly without his children percentage-wise in terms of the flights that you were with him?
There may have been 4 or 5 trips that he didn't have his children with him.
Did he drink white wine out of Coke cans during those flights as well?
Yes.
Did you hide alcohol for him on those flights as well?
Yes.
Did he ever drink any of it, if you recall?
Out of the
hidden alcohol.
I noticed 2 or 3 of the little bottles empty and that was it.
Was it on one of the flights when the children were present, or when they weren't, if you recall?
I don't recall.
You said he drank mixed drinks out of a glass. Was that his normal routine?
Towards the end of the flight, he would, if he was going to get into the tequila, or whatever it was, he normally would get a glass, or I would have a glass for him and make it up. But it wasn't every flight. It was pretty rare.
Okay. Could his kids see him drinking at that point, if you were fixing a mixed drink for him?
They could if they were looking. But we were very discreet about it. He was very discreet.
Do you know an individual by the name of Dieter Weisner?
Yes.
Has he ever flown on Mr. Jackson's flights?
Yes.
How often?
Maybe 3.
This is beyond the scope.
He asked questions about who was on these flights.
All right, overruled.
You may answer.
Maybe 3 out of 10 times.
What about Ronald Konitzer?
I don't recall the name.
How about an individual by the name of Mark Schaffel?
I am familiar with Mr. Schaffel.
How many flights was Mr. Schaffel on with Mr. Jackson?
Maybe 4 out of 10.
And this would all be in the 2003-2004 time frame, or earlier. You tell me.
My initial flight with Mr. Jackson, I know that Mr. Schaffel was on board. And, yes, it was in the 2003. Mr. Schaffel flew with Mr. Jackson towards the beginning of our flights. And towards the end, I didn't see him as often.
All right, thank you. No further questions.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. You may step down.
Thank you.
Call your next witness.
Should be right outside.
Call Louise Palanker.
Come to the front of the courtroom, please. When you get to the witness stand, please remain standing. Face the clerk here. Raise your right hand.
Hi. I do.
Please be seated. State and spell your name for the record.
My name is Louise Palanker. Louise Palanker.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Miss Palanker.
Hi, how are you?
I'm just fine. How are you?
Good.
What is your profession, please?
I'm a comedian, writer, producer, teacher.
All right. And how long have you been so employed?
About 20 years.
Have you had any association over your 20 years as a comedian with the Laugh Factory?
Yes, I have.
Tell me about that, if you would.
I was a comedienne there for a while. And during that time there, I helped Jamie on Saturdays during the summer with comedy camp for underprivileged children.
Okay. You said, Jamie. Would that be Jamie Masada?
Yes, Jamie Masada.
What is the comedy camp?
For 2 months during the summer, he has about 25 children come in from underprivileged neighborhoods and learn how to become comedians. And at the end of the summer, in September, they graduate and they perform in front of a live audience at night, at the Laugh Factory.
And how often did the comedy camp meet over that 2-month period?
Every Saturday for about 4 to 5 hours.
Do you still work with the comedy camp?
No, I started my own program at 2 boys and girls clubs, which I teach stand-up comedy to children all year long.
And when did you switch over from the comedy camp to the boys and girls clubs?
Right after the Arvizos summer. I did both for a little while.
All right.
For a couple of summers afterwards. But I started my own program in 2000, which was the year Gavin got sick.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Miss Palanker, I show you People's Exhibit number 49, a photograph. Can you identify that for me, please?
That's Gavin, Devellin, me and Star.
All right. And when was this picture taken?
That was the day Fritz came as the guest teacher. And I remember he ran off before they could get their picture with him. And that was outside of Laugh Factory after class.
Okay. So was that during one of the comedy camps?
Yes.
And that would have been during one of the regular sessions, or during the end of the graduation ceremony?
It was. I'm feeling like it was the 3rd or 4th Saturday of the summer.
And I don't know if you said it, but did you mention what year that picture was taken?
1999.
Okay.
Summer of 1999.
How did you come to meet the Arvizo children?
They came to audition. I met them the day they auditioned. And then they were chosen to be enrolled in the program.
So there's a selection process for the program?
Yes, there is.
How does that work?
Probably 3 times as many children as Jamie has room for have seen the flyers up at their schools, and teachers have recommended talented children. And they all come down to the Laugh Factory over a series of 2 to 3 Saturdays. And then Jamie makes a final selection, and those children are called and told that they've been selected. And Jamie, he never takes one child from a group of siblings. If he takes one, he takes the brothers and sisters.
So what is the criteria for becoming a member of the Laugh Camp for the children?
I think sometimes he looks for particularly talented children. And sometimes he looks for children that he feels would get something out of the program. For instance, if they're especially withdrawn, he might choose them when you wouldn't think that he would, but he might choose them thinking that they really need it.
Is there any kind of aspect of these children's background that makes them eligible for the Laugh Camp to begin with?
I think he recruits from neighborhoods where the children might not have even a chance to come to that part of town. Or sometimes they haven't even been to Hollywood before.
Okay.
Let's take our afternoon break. See you at 8:30 tomorrow.